Hey there, welcome to Night Lectures, your daily dose of fascinating stories. When fiery pumpkins light up the streets, when children dress as witches and monsters, and shop windows fill with bats and cobwebs, we call it Halloween, a holiday that seems cheerful and lighthearted. Yet behind this playful facade lies a story that stretches deep into the past, to an age when people believed that on one single night, the boundary between worlds disappeared, and the dead returned among the living. In this video, we will trace Halloween's path from the ancient Celtic Samhain to the modern masquerade. We will learn how Christians tried to replace a pagan rite, and why the pumpkin became the main symbol of autumn. We will tell which traditions survived through centuries, and how they ended up on the streets of American cities. We will speak about why we are drawn to images of death, why we wear masks, where ghosts, witches, and skeletons came from, and what this holiday truly means to us, living in the 21st century. Share your ideas for future videos in the comments and hit the subscribe button. New bedtime stories come out here daily. When summer retreated and the earth began to smell of cold, the ancient Celts gathered by great fires. It was the last night of October, the time when, they believed, the boundary between the world of the living and the dead dissolved. They called it Samhain, the turning of the year, when one world paused to give way to another. In their calendar, this feast stood on the threshold of two times, of light and darkness, of life and rest. For their new year began not in spring, but precisely when the sun weakened and the day grew shorter than the night. In Ireland, when the hills of Dublin still knew no stone, people lit fires on the heights. Those flames did not merely illuminate the land, they purified it. The cattle that had grazed all summer returned to their pens, and before that they were driven through the fire to drive out sickness. People cast embers from their hearths into the blaze and then carried home new fire kindled from the common flame, a symbol that the whole community breathed with one breath. In some settlements, such as among the tribe of the Tuatha, Samhain was not merely a celebration, but a time of judgment and decision. Elders gathered in sacred places, on mounds and in valleys where, according to their belief, the spirits of ancestors dwelled. Their disputes were settled, alliances made, and offerings brought. The main thing was not the amount of gifts, but sincerity. One could leave a sheaf of grain or a piece of bread in the field to appease the spirits of the land. Samhain was also a time of fear. It was believed that on that night the souls of the dead returned to the world of the living, and not all were kind. To avoid being recognized by vengeful ghosts, people wore animal hides, smeared their faces with ashes, and donned masks. It was the most ancient prototype of the Halloween costume, both protection and deception. The mask not only hid one from evil, but allowed one, for a moment, to become someone else, a spirit, a beast, an ancestor, and thus touch the mystery. Irish legends tell that during Samhain, the gates of the Side, the underground world of the fairies and gods, opened. On those days, they could walk the earth, and people left bowls of milk or bread at their doors to placate them. In the legend of King Con, for instance, it is told that on Samhain night his house suddenly filled with light, and from the mist came a warrior in a golden cloak. He invited the king to the other world, where time flowed differently and from which few ever returned. Thus Samhain became not merely a festival, but a mythic threshold where history and tale intertwined. Archaeologists find on the hills of Ireland and Scotland traces of bonfires and stone circles where rituals connected with the sun and moon took place. On the hill of Tara, the ancient capital of Irish kings, the fire of Samhain was kindled first, and only after that did all other fires across the land ignite. This flame signified the start of the new year, a symbol that even in darkness, life ripens. Yet Samhain was not only a rite, but an expression of hope. The young people told fortunes to learn with whom they were destined to unite. They threw nuts into the fire, watching which burst together. Girls brought mirrors to the threshold to glimpse the image of their future husband. Some hid a ring in a cake. Whoever found it would be the first to marry in the new year. These simple games, recorded by 19th century folklorists, came directly from Celtic belief. The feast was deeply tied to nature. The Celts divided the year into two halves, light and dark. Samhain opened the winter cycle, the time of rest and reflection. The wind rustling in the fields was believed to be the voice of spirits. People thought the dead came not to frighten but to remind, to ask for prayer, to share knowledge. So families left food and drink on the table for those who could no longer sit beside them. It was the oldest prototype of the memorial supper, preserved also in other European customs. For the Druids, Samhain had special significance. It was the day when wars ceased. Any bloodshed was considered sacrilege, for earth and sky were joined, and any violence could upset the balance. Priests gathered people in sacred groves, brought symbolic offerings, and spoke prophecies for the coming year. They said that only on these nights could they see the future, because the world became transparent. Sources that reached us from Roman chroniclers, for example Julius Caesar's commentaries on the Gallic War, mention the Druids as keepers of knowledge and ritual. Though the Romans regarded them with suspicion, even they admitted that the Celts lived in rhythm with nature and revered the turning of seasons. For them, Samhain was not a feast of death, but a feast of transition, from one cycle of life to another. In legends, this night often marked the beginning of adventure. The hero, Cu Chulainn, according to tradition, on Samhain night fought monsters emerging from the hills, and each battle symbolized the struggle between light and darkness. Since then, Samhain was seen as a trial. Whoever endured it entered the new year purified. Gradually, the rites of Samhain spread across Celtic Europe, to Britain, Scotland, Wales, Gaul. But with the arrival of the Romans, much changed. They brought their own harvest festivals, such as the feast of the goddess Pomona, patroness of orchards. In her honor, they held games with apples, from which came the custom of bobbing for apples in water, a pastime that has survived to this day. Thus, pagan rituals began to intertwine with foreign customs, not disappearing but transforming. Yet the essence of Samhain remained the same. It was the night when the boundary between worlds thinned, when one could remember the dead and ask their protection, when fire helped step into the new time. People gathered by flames told stories of spirits, of warriors, of love and death, because on such nights words sounded differently, as though the whole world listened. Through the centuries, as Celtic tribes dissolved into new peoples, Samhain did not vanish. It changed names, acquired new symbols, yet remained a living reminder of the ancient bond between living and dead. The fires on the hills went out, but the idea that a night could be a doorway endured in human memory. From this myth, from fear, gratitude, and remembrance, Halloween was later born. But that is the story of the next chapter, when Druids gave way to priests, and Samhain met a new faith that sought to turn the night of spirits into the day of saints. When Roman legions landed on Britain's shores, behind their shields moved not only an army, but another, far more persistent power, civilization. It happened in the middle of the 1st century of the Roman era, under Emperor Claudius. Beginning from the southeastern coast, the Romans advanced inland over several decades, gradually subduing Celtic tribes and building forts, roads, villas, aqueducts, and amphitheaters. Yet with the garrisons came festivals, religious calendars, new rites, new words, and above all, a new way of understanding time. The Celts lived according to the cycle of nature. Their year began not in spring like the Romans, but in autumn with Samhain, the night when, they believed, the veil between living and dead dissolved, when one half of the year ended and another began. But now into Celtic lands entered the customs of the goddess Pomona, patroness of fruit and orchards, harvest festivals, the day of Feralia, when Romans commemorated the dead, and Lemuria, a darker rite devoted to expelling malevolent spirits. At first, these rites coexisted. In forts, legionaries honored Mars and Minerva, while beyond the stone walls, villagers still gathered by fires, danced, and left food for spirits. Yet crossroads appeared, places where the local and Roman intersected. In villages, they held fairs combined with tax collections and processions. Mixed families arose where a pagan song stood beside Latin speech, and tales of Druids blended with Christian preaching. The real turning point came later, not in the 1st or 2nd centuries, but in the 4th, when Rome became Christian. Under Emperor Constantine, and especially under Theodosius the Great, who made Christianity the state religion, the old cults began to be displaced. Yet, as often happened, displacement did not mean destruction. The Church chose another path, not prohibition, but reinterpretation. In the 7th century, Pope Boniface IV consecrated the Roman Pantheon, once a pagan temple to all gods, in honor of Christian martyrs, and established the Feast of All Saints, originally set in mid-May. But by the 9th century, Pope Gregory IV moved it to the 1st of November, the very point where the Celtic calendar marked Samhain. It was no accident. The Church sought not so much to abolish the feast as to give it new meaning, to remind people that on this day they should remember not all the dead indiscriminately, but only the saints, those who had walked the path of righteousness. The evening before the 1st of November began to be called All Hallows' Eve, the Eve of All Saints. Over time, this name evolved into the familiar Halloween. Yet in that era, it was not a festival, but a solemn rite of remembrance, prayerful, austere, filled with liturgical meaning. However, in rural parishes of Britain, and especially of Ireland, the new church form could not fully replace old rituals. People still lit bonfires, wore masks, left food on windowsills, and priests, especially in remote regions, faced a choice: fight each custom or try to give it Christian coloring. A legend tells of the monk Columbanus, who in the late 7th century went to a remote village in Western Ireland, where people still greeted autumn with songs by the fire rather than prayers. He spent the night with them, telling stories of saints, reading psalms. Yet in the morning he saw children again playing in masks and women leaving food at thresholds. Columbanus did not condemn them. He said that if the heart seeks contact with the departed, then the church must find the right words for it. Thus began a process lasting centuries. Some elements of Samhain entered Christian custom. The offering of gifts to the poor, bread, sweets, or coins, received new interpretation. Recipients now promised to pray for the souls of the dead. Those little cakes were called soul cakes, and the custom itself, souling. It spread throughout England, especially in the north and center. On the 2nd of November, another feast was instituted, All Souls' Day, complementing All Saints' Day. It was no longer a celebration of martyrs and the elect, but a day of remembrance for all the departed. Thus the Church created a 3-day cycle: the 31st of October, the Eve, the 1st of November, All Saints, the 2nd of November, All Souls. This structure absorbed the ancient intuition of Samhain, translating it into another language rather than destroying it. In monasteries, lists of the dead were compiled, their names read aloud in churches. People ordered services, lit candles, brought bread as offerings. Yet in villages, they still told stories of spirits, omens, and encounters with the dead. The Church did not forbid. It listened, and gradually learned to speak in that language. In England, Wales, northern France, and Ireland, a special layer of customs arose. Folk traditions dressed in Christian robes yet carrying deep archaic roots. Fire, for instance, did not disappear, but now it was lit in honor of saints. Candles were placed on graves, crosses carved into turnips and later pumpkins. The lanterns that once lit the way for souls now symbolize the light of Christ, dispelling darkness. Masks once worn to ward off spirits became part of play, jest, or theatrical action. Some monks even encouraged such forms, believing that dressing up on Halloween helped youth release fear, live through it safely, and emerge purified into the new season. Peasants, craftsmen, children, all took part in these blended celebrations. From house to house went groups of young people performing songs in exchange for food. They called it guising, disguise. As a reward for a song or joke, they received fruit, cakes, or honey sweets, and in return promised to pray, or at least remember the host's ancestors by name. Thus, step by step, the feast born in groves beneath the night sky began to take new form, not as an exile, but as a wandering shadow standing now in the light of the altar. Samhain did not vanish. It transformed, and the Church, perhaps against its first intentions, became not a destroyer, but a new guardian of memory. Yet this process did not end in the Middle Ages. Residual forms, masks, disguises, bonfires, treats, and divinations continued to live and evolve. In this new body born from the fusion of faiths, the feelings for which it all began did not disappear. Fear of death, gratitude to ancestors, hope for light amid darkness. When the autumn sky sinks lower, when fog settles in the valleys and the air breathes the scent of fire and wet grass, the villages of Britain, Scotland, and Ireland entered a time that could not be named with a single word. Not merely a holiday, not merely an evening, not merely a rite. It was a night in which memory and play, fear and laughter, divination and gift came together. It is precisely these traditions, preserved across centuries, that kept the ancient feast of Samhain from vanishing under the weight of church prohibitions and allowed it to remain alive, like the living fabric of a people's soul. One of the oldest and most enduring customs was dressing up. On the eve of November, especially in the evening hours, young people and children donned costumes, made masks, painted their faces with soot, ash, flour, or ochre, put on hides, scraps, quilted vests, tied on little bells, and sometimes even fastened straw tails to their backs. This rite was called guising, disguise. Its roots went back to the Celtic belief that on this night the boundary between worlds disappeared and the spirits of the dead could return, not necessarily with kind intent. A mask offered protection. The spirit would not recognize you and would do no harm. At the same time, dressing up served another function. For a while the social mask was shed, and a person could become anyone at all. Sources from the 17th century preserved in Scottish archives mention groups of teenagers who, in the evening, went around the houses in the area, knocked on doors, and recited rhymes or blessings. The householders treated them in return with raisin cakes, nuts, apples, or small coins. Sometimes, as thanks, a short skit or song had to be performed. This form of exchange was not mere amusement, but an ancient rite, a commerce between the world of the living and the other world. If you gave treats, you acknowledged. If you gave nothing, you might invite mockery or offense. It was the prototype of the future formula trick or treat, though it lived in folk culture long before the modern phrase appeared. Fire remained the heart of the festival. In every village there was a hill, an open square, or simply a crossroads where, from morning, a bonfire pile was stacked. Logs, dry branches, bundles of straw, old furniture, roots, sometimes odds and ends kept in the shed for Samhain all year long. The fire was not lit at once. They waited for darkness. The first to approach the pile was either the elder or the blacksmith, someone regarded by the community as possessing special power. He spoke a few words, short, not formal ritual, but respectful. Let evil burn. Let the path shine. Let it be clean. And the flames leapt up. People gathered around the fire in a circle. They jumped through the flames. They cast into the blaze chips of wood, nuts, and at times, symbolic objects, little carved figures, sheaves of rye, scraps of cloth. This meant a farewell to illness, misfortune, debt, quarrels. The young sang and told stories, the adults watched, the children hid behind their parents, and all of this took place within a common action uniting not only those who lived, but also those who were gone. The next day the ashes from the bonfire were scattered over the fields, so that the earth will know she is remembered. In many homes there was a rite of carrying the fire. One of the men, most often newly betrothed, had to take a coal from the bonfire, wrap it in cloth, and carry it home to light the household hearth from it. This fire was considered strong, blessed. It was to warm the house all winter, to protect from illness and poor harvest. It was kept in a clay bowl beside icons or charms, and was not extinguished without need. Apples were an inseparable part of the rite. They were the year's last fruits, and people ascribed to them the power of foresight. One of the most common customs was bobbing for apples in a tub of water without using hands. Young people took turns bending down and trying to grip the slippery fruit with their teeth. Whoever snatched it first would be the first to marry, or would be lucky in love. It looked like a game, but it was taken seriously. Laughter, splashes, excitement, and the sense that life could be foretold, if only at the level of a gesture. Other forms of divination were more complex. In Ireland, girls baked a little cake and hid objects inside. A coin, a button, a thread, a ring. Each thing had a meaning: wealth, loneliness, a journey, a wedding. The cake was cut without looking and eaten in a hush. Some stepped outside at midnight carrying a mirror to see the image of their betrothed in the reflection. Others went to a stream and set afloat a nutshell with a burning sliver. If it did not sink, the coming year would be fortunate. In Scotland there was a rite with two nuts, one named for oneself, the other for one's beloved. They were laid on a stone slab near the fire. If the nuts burned side by side, love would be strong. If one sprang away, the feelings were not meant to be. These simple games were a language of expectation. They lent meaning to the cold, dark night, making it not frightening but a rightful part of life. Children were told tales, frightening yet important, of a woman with goat's legs, of a boy who went out at night for an apple and never returned, of an old man with eyes like embers, sitting on a stone by the ford. These stories did not terrify but taught. They were a form of memory, of what should not be done, of whom to respect, of the boundaries one must keep even while playing. Lanterns, at first from turnips. The turnip was hollowed and scraped with a spoon. Slits were cut for eyes, nose, and mouth. A candle was placed inside. It was set on a window or a fence. The ugly, distorted turnip with its crooked face was a warning. People live here. Memory lives here. Spirits are not welcome here. Later, when pumpkins entered common use, first in America, then in Europe, they replaced turnips. But the image remained the same. In some parts of Britain and Ireland, mumming plays have been known since the early Middle Ages, short folk skits. A few people put on simple costumes and played a doctor, a patient, a saint, a knight, death. The lines were rhymed, often improvised. The hero died and rose again. It was a theatrical rite in which death became part of a joke, and therefore was conquered. All these customs, disguises, bonfires, apples, little cakes, jokes, scary tales, came together into a rite that preserved the bond with ancestors, with the land, with the year that was passing. There was no script, there was no conductor. Everything unfolded as memory unfolds, in fragments, gestures, scents, voices. The holiday lived because people felt it. It is thanks to this deep feeling that Halloween survived the centuries. Neither church prohibitions nor political bans nor the change of languages rooted it out. It endured because it remained intelligible, a night when one could be oneself and not oneself, when one could speak of death without fear, when one could remember the dead and feel that they are near. When in the middle of the 19th century steamships departed one after another from the ports of Liverpool, Belfast, and the Clyde, families stood on their decks with simple bundles holding not only food for the voyage, but also scraps of old memory, traditions, songs, customs, beliefs. With them, Halloween crossed to the New World, not yet as a mass holiday, but as an evening of remembrance, of bonfire, of mask, and of the old childhood ghost story whispered at the door. After the Great Famine that struck Ireland in 1845, hundreds of thousands left the island. Over 2 decades. More than 1 million. Most were poor, tenant farmers, hired hands, widows, elders. Whole villages moved not singly, but as communities. Their path led to the United States, Canada, and Australia, where churches, schools, shops, and traditions soon appeared. They were later joined by Scots. After the collapse of the clan system and forced agrarian reforms in the Scottish Highlands, especially in the second half of the 19th century, mass migration began. From Inverness, Glasgow, and Aberdeen, not only individuals left, but families, carrying with them the Gaelic language, songs, and autumn rites. Protestant America at first regarded these traditions with caution. In New England, especially in states with a strong Puritan heritage, any festivities with elements of masquerade, noise, and folk belief were condemned. Bonfires were considered pagan remnants, and tales of returning souls provoked bewilderment. Yet in the big cities where immigrants lived compactly, near factories, building sites, and docks, these customs did not disappear. In the Irish quarters of Boston, New York, and Philadelphia, Halloween was marked in a close circle. The family gathered in the evening, baked bread with a coin or a ring, set a candle in a pumpkin, told the children old stories, dressed in simple costumes. The streets were still dark, without electric light, and the shadow falling from the windows seemed like something alive. The first newspaper mentions of Halloween in North America date to the 1850s. In an issue of the Montreal Gazette from 1853, there is an account of an evening organized by Irish youth, with masks, songs, fortune-telling with apples and cakes. Letters from emigrants also contain descriptions, how they set a pumpkin with fire inside, how children frightened neighbors, how women threw nutshells into the flames and divined by the crackling. Lanterns carved from turnips, familiar in Europe, were soon replaced in America by pumpkins. The reason was simple. Pumpkins were larger, softer, easier to carve, and, just as important, grown everywhere. Thus the jack-o'-lantern was born, a carved pumpkin lantern with a candle inside, set by the door as a sign that people lived there, that customs were honored, and that the home was guarded against night spirits. That image proved so vivid that it quickly spread across the country. By the end of the 19th century, carved pumpkins began to appear not only among the Irish but in the homes of Americans of German, Dutch, and even Swedish origin. It ceased to be foreign, becoming an element of autumn decor, bright, playful, yet still bearing a trace of ritual function. Going from house to house grew customary as well. Children, sometimes with parents, sometimes in small groups, walked the street, knocked on doors, and sang short songs or recited verses. In return, they received apples, nuts, cookies, and sometimes coins. At times, The tradition included an element of promise. In exchange for treats, children prayed for the souls of the host's departed relatives. This echoed the medieval custom of souling, reinterpreted on American soil. From the late 1880s, cities began to host parties, first in parish halls, then in schools, clubs, and libraries. Newspapers printed advice on how to decorate a room, what dishes to serve, how to make a homemade mask. For example, an issue of Ladies' Home Journal from 1898 offered a list of games: apple divination, finding a coin in dough, mirror corridor, and masked dance. It recommended using maple leaves, dried corn, wreaths of nuts, pumpkin lanterns, and preserving an atmosphere of mystery and cheerful fright. Thus, Halloween gradually entered American everyday life. It had not yet become mass market, had not yet turned into an industry. It was domestic, autumnal, half fairy tale. Not everyone observed it, but it was already moving beyond ethnic communities. The children of Americans born to mixed families eagerly adopted disguises, pulled pranks, learned to carve faces into pumpkins, and listened to stories about witches and ghosts. The holiday found particular favor among teachers. Schools used Halloween as an occasion for extracurricular activities, for play, for teaching children about culture. Textbooks included legends, silhouette cutting, simple skits. Parents gladly joined in. They brought treats, helped with costumes, sewed masks. Thus, Halloween became a family affair. In some regions, especially Pennsylvania and Ohio, elements from German folklore were added: reading fate by the shadow of a flame, dripping wax into water, carving protective signs. This blending of cultures became a hallmark of the American holiday. It did not displace other traditions, but absorbed them, turning into a common field for imagination, play, and ritual. By the beginning of the 20th century, Halloween in America had three forms: the domestic, an evening within the family with treats and stories; the civic, costume parties and parades; and the children's, going from house to house, songs, games, and pumpkins. It still retained a connection to remembrance, but it was becoming ever more secular, accessible, and merry. How it would become a vast industry, how Hollywood would turn its gaze upon it, how mass-produced costumes, postcards, candies, and films would appear. We will tell in the next chapter. For now, in the twilight, on the porch of a wooden house on a lamplit street of Boston or Toronto, a carved pumpkin already glows, and on the pavement you hear the tapping heels of a child in a mask. The child goes for a treat, carrying within a centuries-old tradition that neither poverty nor famine nor the ocean could break. When the 20th century began, Halloween had already firmly taken root in American society, not as a state or religious feast, but as a day where remembrance, play, disguise, and the hope of protection were intertwined. It lived in schools, parishes, houses at the edges of towns, on porches where children set lanterns, and in basements where teenagers told scary stories. But it was in this century, amid the whirl of industrialization, cinema, and urban growth, that it became what it is today, a mass cultural phenomenon that embraced the whole country and became part of American identity. In the first decades of the century, traditions that had arrived from Ireland, Scotland, and England, costumes, pumpkins, divinations, going from house to house, continued to develop and adapt to the new urban environment. In New York, Boston, Chicago, Cleveland, and other industrial centers, Halloween was observed not only in ethnic communities, but already in mixed neighborhoods. Children, regardless of origin, dressed as witches, clowns, devils, or household animals, and knocked on neighbors' doors. Teachers and church workers organized school plays, fairs, and mask contests. The holiday was gradually shifting from folklore to public culture. By the early 1920s, the first factory-made masks appeared. At first, they were made of cardboard, papier-mâché, or heavy cloth, often hand-painted. Shops sold home decoration kits, images of black cats, skeleton silhouettes, paper lanterns. Ready-made costumes began to be sold, at first very simple, a cloak and hat or a smock with a mask, and then more and more varied. By the late 1930s in large cities, there were already companies specializing in seasonal Halloween goods. Major retail chains, such as Sears and Montgomery Ward, began to include entire Halloween sections in their fall catalogs. There one could find not only clothing and decorations, but also table-setting recommendations, recipes, and ideas for children's games. Commerce, step by step, transformed the holiday from folk to industrial. At the same time, Children's and teenagers' activity on the streets increased. In many American cities, especially in industrial districts, late October saw a rise in minor mischief, throwing eggs at windows, chalk drawings on walls, removing door handles, and hanging scarecrows on lampposts. These acts caused concern, and municipal authorities sought ways to redirect youthful energy. Thus, official parades appeared. One of the first took place in the city of Anoka, Minnesota in 1920. City officials organized a procession with music, costumes, contests, and treats to create a celebration that would unite rather than frighten. During the Great Depression, which gripped the country in the 1930s, the holiday did not disappear, though it became more modest. Families could not afford expensive costumes and treats, so everything was homemade. Pumpkins carved from whatever could be obtained, costumes sewn from old clothes, lanterns decorated with newspapers and branches. Yet Halloween retained its appeal, as a chance to escape, to play, to feel joy. It became especially meaningful precisely because it was a celebration without obligations, without costly gifts, without elaborate preparation. A key moment in the rise of mass Halloween was Hollywood. In the 1930s and 1940s, the first classic horror films reached the screen. Frankenstein, Dracula, The Mummy, The Invisible Man, The Wolf Man. These images instantly entered popular culture and inspired costumes. Children dressed as monsters, teenagers painted bloody scars on their faces, shops began selling rubber masks, makeup, and fake fangs. Halloween acquired a clear visual language. After the Second World War, amid economic boom, the holiday blossomed. In the 1950s, Halloween became truly family-oriented. Parents dressed their children, decorated the house, cooked themed dishes, organized best costume contests. Local newspapers published tips for a safe and cheerful celebration, how to use handy materials for crafts, which contests to hold in class. Libraries held readings of scary stories, and schools mounted art shows and plays. It was in this decade that the formula trick or treat entered mass consciousness. Once it had existed locally, now it became nationwide. It appeared on candy wrappers, postcards, and magazine covers. The largest candy manufacturers, Mars, Hershey's, Nestle, began preparing special Halloween assortments, small bars, multicolored caramels, wafers, lollipops. Shops displayed entire sections labeled, "Only for the 31st of October." In the 1960s and 1970s, the holiday grew even more diverse. Young people, especially students and hippies, used Halloween as a space for self-expression. Costumes became satirical, political, absurd. One could see people dressed as presidents, philosophers, comic book heroes, or literary characters. The holiday ceased to be only for children. It became a zone of freedom for all ages. In the 1980s, the Halloween industry reached new scale. Shops sold hundreds of kinds of decor, costumes, and makeup. Television broadcast special episodes of shows and cartoons. Cinemas screened horror films, from classics to new slashers. A whole genre emerged, the Halloween movie, meant for an evening viewing at the end of October. Nevertheless, beneath all the commerce, the essence remained. Every family had its own traditions. Someone baked an apple pie every autumn and told the same tale. Someone carved a pumpkin the way a grandmother had. Someone gathered neighborhood children and read them frightening legends by candlelight. The holiday kept its duality. On the one hand, large-scale, industrial, vivid. On the other, quiet, familial, warm. Thus, Halloween of the 20th century became a celebration able to unite generations, cultures, and entire cities. It grew from folk memory, passed through the cinema screen, the shop counter, the school blackboard, the candy wrapper, and all the while remained alive. When October enters its last week and orange begins to dominate not only parks and forests, but also shop windows, posters, packages, and clothing, the whole world knows Halloween is approaching. It has become a holiday impossible to miss. It lives in schools and on streets, in digital communities and theme parks, in family kitchens and supermarkets. It embraces both children and adults. And more often it is celebrated not because that is how it is done, but because it has become the moment in the year when one may briefly bend the rules without breaking the order. In the United States of America, Halloween is now observed everywhere, from quiet Midwestern towns to the high rises of New York. According to research agencies, every year more than 70% of Americans prepare for the holiday. Total spending on costumes, sweets, decorations, and events reaches several billions of dollars, second only to Christmas outlays. Yet behind these figures stands not merely commerce, but genuine social participation in a shared cultural game. One of the brightest forms is the parade in Greenwich Village, a New York neighborhood where, for almost half a century, costumed processions have taken place. This parade gathers tens of thousands of participants and hundreds of thousands of spectators. There is no stage, no main hero. Everyone is equal. The streets fill with images for every taste, from classic witches, skeletons, werewolves, and ghosts to historical figures, pop stars, film characters, and utterly absurd fantasies. Pharaohs, vegetables, irons, politicians, dinosaurs, and storybook figures move along the sidewalks. People sing, dance, and embrace. Hands wave from balconies. It is an urban carnival night where everyone becomes part of the same grand play. In small towns and villages, Halloween looks different. The home and school form still predominates. Carved pumpkins stand on porches, straw scarecrows by the doors. In classrooms, teachers hang children's drawings, organize mini performances, and give symbolic prizes for funniest costume or scariest mask. Parents bake bat-shaped cookies, come to school with treats, and help decorate the rooms. In such places, Halloween preserves what it began with: a sense of community, of autumnal preparation for winter, of the slight unease that comes with the arriving dark. At the same time, there is an industrial Halloween. Across the country in October, hundreds of haunted houses operate, theatrical routes through sets where actors in masks, sound effects, and sudden mechanisms frighten visitors. Some attractions occupy entire warehouses or hangars and work with professional directors, set designers, and costumers. The age rating for some can be 18 plus, and would-be entrants sign a voluntary waiver. Theme parks, such as Universal Studios, Six Flags, and Disneyland, turn in October into vast thematic worlds. At Universal Studios, new horror mazes are created every year, based on horror films, television series, and urban legends. At Disneyland, there is a gentler version: fairs, carousels, and costume characters who smile rather than scare. At Six Flags, you get a combination: a children's celebration by day and fear for adults by evening. This is Halloween as a season stretched across several weeks. The United States is no longer the only country where Halloween has taken root. In Canada, it has been celebrated since the early 20th century, especially in Ontario and British Columbia. In the United Kingdom, and particularly in Scotland and Northern Ireland, it has revived actively over the past 3 decades. Schools, pub quizzes, family events, and window lanterns. In Ireland, where it was born, Halloween remains especially esteemed, though many old forms have been replaced by new ones. In Japan, Halloween appeared in the 1990s, first as park entertainment, then as a costumed youth festival. Today, Tokyo and Osaka host parades, photo shoots, and cosplay gatherings. Japanese Halloween is less frightening but more visual. Style, detail, makeup, and photogenic quality matter. It entered the culture through aesthetics rather than religious or folkloric memory. In Germany, France, Spain, Poland, and the Baltic states, the holiday spread through schools and shops. Parents buy costumes, schools organize evenings, and upper grades stage themed quests. Sometimes the holiday is criticized as alien, but it takes hold because children experience it as a game and adults gradually make peace with it. In Mexico, on these same days, the Day of the Dead takes place, an ancient feast tied to remembering ancestors, decorating graves, and making home altars. And though in essence it is a different ritual, it increasingly meets Halloween visually: skeletons, masks, music, candles. Some schools hold events where children learn about both holidays, emphasizing the differences while honoring each. Social networks have finally turned Halloween into a visual festival. On Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, millions of posts appear. Most unusual costume, silliest pumpkin, horror from the school hallway. People share photos of their children, of pets in outfits, drawings, prank videos, and they launch challenges. The internet has created its own layer of Halloween, from memes to tender family stories. Yet for all the visuals, the mass adoption, and the commercial forms, at the center of the holiday remains a simple human feeling: to be together, to be a little scared, to laugh a little, to sense the approach of darkness yet not remain alone in it. By putting on a mask, a person becomes no less oneself, sometimes even more. One allows oneself to be different, to be free, to be a child, to be a monster, to be a forgotten hero, to be anyone at all. And this is not an escape, but a return to the play from which culture was born. Today, Halloween lives in schools, universities, families, nursing homes, hospitals, online platforms, parks, costume shops, and street parades. It sounds in many voices: a child's laughter, the whisper of a legend, an actor's loud scream, music from speakers. It has become not only a holiday of fear, but a holiday of time, when we can pause, look at ourselves from the outside, laugh at what we fear, and celebrate the very fact of transition, from autumn to winter, from light to darkness, from weekdays to something other. When the last night of October arrives, the world seems to become a theater in which every image, from pumpkin to ghost, from mask to bonfire, carries not mere entertainment, but an echo of the ancient fear with which humanity has lived for millennia. However light Halloween may feel in modern cities, it remains a feast where behind every smiling lantern and every sweep of a broom stands a memory of the boundary between worlds. Let us begin with the holiday's chief symbol, the pumpkin. In Ireland and Scotland, faces were originally carved not from pumpkins but from turnips, swedes, or potatoes. These root vegetables were used to make so-called jack-o'-lanterns. They were placed by doorways or hung on poles to ward off spirits wandering on Samhain, the Celtic night of passage from light to dark. According to legend, Jack, a cunning blacksmith who tricked the devil and was denied entry to both heaven and hell, was condemned to roam the world with a glowing coal and a hollowed-out turnip. This story formed the basis of the tradition that, once moved to the New World, swapped the turnip for the pumpkin, larger, brighter, and softer. The meaning, however, remained the same. The light inside the pumpkin symbolizes the human fire that does not go out even in the night. We carve frightening or funny faces, place a candle within, and thus tame fear, turning it into play, into a household rite. Here lies the essence of Halloween: to grant darkness a place, but not to let it swallow the light. Another enduring image is the witch. Her alarming silhouette, pointed hat, broom, and cauldron is no accident. In the Middle Ages, women with knowledge of herbs, healing, or divination were often branded as witches. To fall outside social expectations could bring denunciation, trial, and the stake. The harshest persecutions took place in Germany, France, and Switzerland. In the city of Trier, for instance, in one single year, 1583, more than 300 women were burned. The witch's mask on Halloween is not merely a joke, but the shadow of a tragedy that became an image. In the modern rite, it keeps the echo of fear before knowledge, independence, and the other. The bat, a creature of the night, has always stirred unease with its silent flight and habit of hiding in dark places. In Celtic belief, it was thought able to pass between worlds, like spirits. Later, in the Victorian era, it was linked with vampires, beings who drank blood, shunned daylight, and dwelt in Gothic castles. Yet even in the oldest lore, the bat signified passage and intuition, a reminder that not everything visible in daylight is the whole truth. The ghost is another key figure. It has no form. It is a presence, a reminder of something lost, yet not gone. In many cultures, from Japanese to Slavic, the spirits of the dead return on certain days, not for vengeance but to be near. By donning a sheet and playing a ghost, we tacitly admit we have a past, and it is not always at peace. We laugh at the image, yet inside remains the understanding that memory lives. Skeletons are a visual memento of death. They appear on costumes, candies, and shop fronts. But unlike the real dread of bodily demise, the Halloween skeleton is a caricature, a comic, a grin. So it was in the Middle Ages, when Europe loved the dances of death, images of skeletons leading emperors, peasants, and monks alike. It was not mere terror, but a philosophy. All passes. Today the skeleton is part of a shared game with finitude, without panic, with irony. Masks play a special role. By putting on a mask, one becomes someone else. But on Halloween night, this is not simple transformation. It is an acknowledgement that much lives within us. The inner monster, the silly jester, the sorrowful spirit, all come outside for one night. The mask protects, yet reveals. Perhaps this is why children love the holiday. It lets them be what they cannot be in ordinary life. And adults, clad as demons, witches, and superheroes, grant themselves the rare right to be imperfect. Monsters, werewolves, zombies, and vampires inhabit culture because they mirror inner conflicts. The werewolf is ungoverned rage. The vampire is fear of those who feed on others' energy. The zombie is fear of losing reason, of becoming a will-less mass. Yet at Halloween, these terrors become figures of play. We bring them into the open, give them names, put costumes on them, and thus diffuse them. It is an old mechanism, psychological and cultural. Halloween proposes not that we fight fear, but that we acknowledge it, to look straight at what we dread, to smirk, to decorate it, to invite it to dance. Fear is not an enemy. It is a mirror. It reminds us that we are mortal, vulnerable, temporary. And precisely for that reason it matters to laugh, to dress up, to light lanterns, to tell stories. A holiday once born from the rite of passage from summer to winter, from life to death, has become a day when we meet our own shadow with open eyes, and we say, I see you. I do not fear you. I live. Every 31st of October we light candles and pumpkins again, hear again the rustle of a costume, embrace again a child frightened by a cartoon, look again into a dark window, and all of it means we remember, we fear, and we laugh, which is to say, we live.